That signal's coming from the graveyard. Tell me why we're not turning the hell around. Commander Dane Vortan barely shifted his eyes from the laser plasma display before him, fingers curled tight around the steel armrest of his command chair. The black void outside his warship, Halvath Prime, stretched endlessly, but his focus was locked on the blinking beacon on his tactical readout. Earth, a planet that was supposed to be nothing more than dead rock and ash, yet somehow pulsing with a signal like a still-beating heart beneath ruined flesh. Because I want to know who, or what, is calling out from a world that was wiped clean a millennium ago, Dane answered. His voice was level, but something in his chest coiled tight. Lieutenant Kryn Voss, the ship's navigation officer, exhaled sharply, tapping rapid-fire commands onto her panel. I can tell you who it isn't. It's not human. Not anymore. Dane didn't respond. The crew didn't talk about Earth. Not unless they had to. The final war, the Extinction event, the blackened bones of their ancestors buried under layers of planetary dust. It wasn't history. It was a warning. Visual in 5 seconds, Tactical Officer Jorek Danis announced, his deep voice clipped and sure. We're entering high orbit. The ship shuddered as the artificial gravity adjusted, a deep thrum in the bulkhead, as the stabilizers compensated for the planet's pull. On the heads-up display, Earth rolled into view, and for a long moment, silence hung over the bridge like an executioner's blade. It was wrong. Every textbook rendering, every historical model of post-war Earth had shown a barren wasteland, a place stripped raw by nuclear storms, orbital bombardments, and bioplagues designed to choke the last remnants of life from its crust. This wasn't that. Massive storm fronts coiled like steel cables over the atmosphere. Thick clouds shot through with streaks of golden-red light, twisting into vortexes that stretched for miles. Where the surface should have been an endless ruin of cracked earth, they saw structures, colossal jagged towers breaching through the ground like metallic ribs, their surfaces gleaming as if untouched by time. And then there was the signal. It wasn't just a transmission. It was a pulse, low and rhythmic, vibrating through their ship's systems, tangling with their comms, distorting their scanners. Like a call, like a pulse of something buried deep. Alive. Kryn swallowed. Commander, whatever's down there, it's not natural. Dane's jaw tensed. We send a team. Jorek turned his head sharply. Sir, that wasn't a suggestion. The landing craft rattled through the atmosphere, its hull heating as the gravitational forces clawed at it. Dane sat rigid in his seat, his gloved hands clenched as the force pressed against his chest. Across from him, Jorek tightened the straps of his harness, his expression impassive but his knuckles pale where they gripped his rifle. Through the reinforced viewport, the surface of Earth stretched below like an open wound, broken highways leading to skeletal remains of skyscrapers, entire districts submerged beneath shifting metallic dunes. Then, without warning, the ship's lights flickered, the stabilizers stalling for a fraction of a second. What was that? Kryn's voice snapped through the comms. Dane's gaze flicked to the displays. Something was interfering with their descent. Then the ship jerked violently, metal groaning, systems failing. Not an attack. Something stronger, something pulling them down. Engines are... They plummeted. The force of impact ripped the air from Dane's lungs, his skull snapping back against the seat. The world spun in a riot of flashing lights and screaming alarms, metal screaming against stone. Then, just as suddenly, the motion stopped. Silence. Dane's vision blurred, blood roaring in his ears. Around him, the landing craft was a wreck of exposed wiring and cracked steel. Red emergency lighting painted the interior in flickering wound-like slashes of color. Jorek groaned, already unclipping his harness, boots crunching over debris. Everyone alive? Kryn coughed, pressing a palm to her forehead where blood trickled through her fingertips. Define alive. Dane forced his limbs to move, unstrapping and standing despite the throbbing pain in his ribs. The forward viewport was shattered. Beyond it lay something that shouldn't exist. A city. Not ruins, not bones of the past. An active, humming city buried beneath the surface, revealed only by their crash. The buildings weren't human-made, not entirely. Their shapes were jagged, the architecture folding inward in a way that bent logic. As if each structure was built from shifting plates of an unknown alloy, its surface shifting slightly as if it were breathing. And then the ground rumbled. Jorek lifted his rifle. "I don't like this." Dane didn't either, but he stepped forward. Something waited in the dark. A faint glow flickered between the structures. At first it seemed like simple bioluminescence, the kind found in deep ocean trenches. But then it moved, converging into patterns, flickering into symbols older than any known human language. A low mechanical voice, ancient, fractured, yet terribly aware, crackled to life. Observation protocol breached. System awakening. Then the city roared to life. Lights blazed to full power, flooding the cavernous expanse with searing white fire, shadows splitting and reforming in jagged angles. A sudden howl of shifting metal echoed through the corridors as colossal mechanisms groaned into movement, plates sliding apart, revealing something waiting beneath the surface. A wall of metallic figures emerged, tall, skeletal frames reinforced with plates of obsidian-hued armor, their eyes nothing but vertical slits, burning with deep crimson light. Their limbs, long and jointed, flexed with inhuman smoothness, and in their hands, weapons unlike anything seen in the Dominion's archives, pulsed to life. Jorek didn't hesitate. He fired first. The impact rippled across the lead figure's chest, sending shockwaves through its plating like liquid metal meeting force. But it didn't stop. The figures moved as one, silent, calculated, brutal. Then the first shot rang out from their side, and Jorek's rifle shattered mid-fire, ripped apart by a force no projectile should wield. Dane had a second to process it before the ground split beneath them, metal panels peeling back, revealing something far larger waiting in the depths. And then, for the first time in 1,000 years, Earth fought back. The ground wasn't just shifting, it was peeling apart, layers of metal plates sliding with a calculated grace, revealing a hidden abyss beneath their feet. A deep rhythmic tremor surged through the buried city, rattling the broken landing craft like a toy in a storm. The air thickened, vibrating with something unseen, something waking up after a long, unnatural slumber. Dane Vortan didn't have the luxury of hesitation. His sidearm was already drawn, the charge cycling to full output as the skeletal warforms advanced, jointed limbs moving with unnatural smoothness, each step deliberate, weightless. Their armor, if it could be called that, was unlike anything he'd seen. It absorbed the light from the cavern's floodlamps, making them seem half-submerged in shadow, their slit-like eyes burning with a dull, predatory glow. "Back up!" Jorek's voice carried over the comms, tight with controlled panic. His rifle, now useless in his grip, was tossed aside as he pulled his sidearm. Not a single round fired had stopped them. Dane fired. The shot slammed into the closest warform's chest, the impact sending out a ripple of energy across its surface like liquid metal disrupted by a stone. For half a second it staggered, but then the plating contracted, reformed, swallowed the wound whole. Crin's breath hitched. "What the hell are they made of?" Not stopping to ask, Dane growled. "Move!" The floor beneath them gave another violent lurch, and suddenly they were falling, not into open air, but into a labyrinth of moving plates and shifting corridors that reshaped themselves mid-collapse, spiraling down into the depths of the buried city. Dane landed hard on a steel platform, the impact rattling through his spine. His boots skidded against the shifting metal, finding purchase just as Jorek and Crin slammed down nearby, their breathing sharp and uneven. The warforms, whatever they were, hadn't pursued. Not immediately. They had vanished into the corridors above, like wolves letting their prey run before the chase resumed. Jorek lifted his weapon, pulse racing. "Tell me we didn't just fall into something worse." No one answered. The cavern stretched before them, impossibly vast. Not a ruin, but a city built in layers upon layers, its infrastructure woven through shifting metallic veins. Towering constructs loomed overhead, their surfaces lined with slender, luminous conduits pulsing in patterns that resembled a heartbeat. There was movement, but not for many people. Instead, massive, insect-like constructs slid through the walls and ceilings, adjusting panels, replacing sections of machinery, as if the city was self-repairing. A low, crackling voice broke through the comms, not from the ship, not from any known frequency. Protocol breach detected. Archive access. Authorized. Dane's stomach nodded. Who the hell is speaking? Designation KELEM-VI, Central Intelligence of the Epitaph Bastion. Stand by. A deep vibration shuddered through the walls. Then, at the far end of the corridor, a set of colossal doors groaned apart, revealing a structure unlike anything else in the buried city. It was a vault, suspended within a framework of rotating mechanisms that clicked and shifted in endless sequences, locking and unlocking invisible data streams. The walls were etched with an unknown language, glowing with pulsing blue sigils, their patterns shifting like the flicker of embers in a dying fire. "Whatever's down here," Kryn muttered, stepping forward cautiously. "It's been waiting." Dane narrowed his gaze, stepping ahead of her, his sidearm still raised. "For what?" "For war." The words rang out through the chamber, not from a speaker, but through the very air itself. The doors slid fully open, revealing the contents of the vault, and suddenly they understood. Inside, arranged in perfect surgical alignment, were rows upon rows of suspended war machines. Not just vehicles, not just mechs, weapons that defied logic, constructed from alloys that no species in the galaxy had ever documented. Some were quadrupedal, designed with segmented limbs that could adapt to shifting environments. Others were monolithic constructs, bristling with advanced energy projectors embedded into the very framework of their towering chassis. Then there were the Sentinels. They stood lined along the walls, humanoid in structure, but grotesquely enhanced, their skeletal frames reinforced with dense plating that shimmered like liquid mercury under the vault's pale light. Their arms were not mere limbs, but integrated weapons, their ocular displays cycling through unknown data streams as if scanning threats that weren't even present yet. But the worst part wasn't their appearance. It was that they were waiting, dormant, ready to wake. Jorek exhaled through clenched teeth. "This isn't a ruin. It's a damn armory." Dane stepped toward the control pedestal at the center of the vault, its interface not a console, but a lattice of pulsing energy filaments, swirling like a miniature nebula trapped within a glass frame. He reached out, and the moment his fingers brushed against the surface, the room reacted. Data surged across the walls, a rapid flood of information burning through the air in bursts of white-blue light. Then, Kalem Vai's voice returned, clearer, more resolute. Humanity was never lost. It was preserved, sealed beneath the remnants of their own world, awaiting the only inevitability that mattered. The return of the enemy. Dane's blood ran cold. The Voidborn. Primary directive, Planetary Reclamation Protocol. Secondary directive, annihilation of hostile external forces. A new sound rumbled through the cavern, the same seismic vibration they had felt before. But this time, it was controlled, directed. The war machines were waking. Kryn stiffened. "We need to go. Now." Dane didn't move. His pulse thundered in his ears. This was too much, too calculated. It meant one thing. Humanity knew this day would come. Before he could voice the thought, Kalem V's final statement sent an ice-cold grip down his spine. "You were never alone. You were only the first to arrive." Atmospheric breach detected. Hostile signatures inbound. Kalem V's voice surged through Dane's earpiece as the vault's platform lurched upward, the walls peeling away like the ribs of a beast exposing its iron heart. They weren't just being led to the surface. They were being deployed. Kryn braced herself against the shifting floor, her visor flashing with warning signals as the platform accelerated. "Whatever we're about to see up there, I hope it's on our side." Jorek grunted, adjusting his grip on his rifle. "That makes one of us." Then the hangar doors above split apart, and light seared into their retinas, momentarily blinding them before the battlefield revealed itself. And what a battlefield it was. They weren't stepping into just any hangar. This was a war cradle, an entire underground deployment bay that had remained sealed for 1,000 years, untouched by time, waiting for this exact moment. Towering above them, arranged in rows like slumbering gods of steel and death, were the true war forms of the old world. Dane barely breathed as his eyes swept over the monstrosities. Titan walkers, bipedal siege engines 3 stories tall, their plating layered in adaptive ablative armor, each slab of metal reinforced with a nanite-infused substructure that repaired on impact. Their upper torsos housed massive rotating weapon arrays, each joint reinforced with hydraulic stabilizers so powerful they could crush stone underfoot without losing balance. The heads, if they could even be called that, were flat, featureless slabs of metal, with a singular vertical slit running through the center, pulsing with a deep crimson glow as their sensors calibrated to the open battlefield. Further down the bay, skimmer drones lined the walls in vertical racks. Not conventional war drones. These were predation-class hunter swarms, semi-autonomous aerial strike platforms designed to operate in synchronized attack formations. Each sleek, razor-winged construct bristled with adaptive micro-turrets, capable of firing focused ionized plasma rounds that could shred infantry and light armor in seconds. Their frames were coated in a reactive polymesh that refracted light, making them nearly invisible at long range. Dane's gaze locked onto the largest construct in the hangar, a land dreadnought, a siege-class mobile fortress mounted on massive reinforced treads, each individual segment layered with heat-dissipating ceramic plating. Its surface was a patchwork of overlapping armor slabs designed to fold and shift under fire to minimize kinetic force. But its true horror lay in its main weapon, a forward-facing triple-barrel fusion cannon embedded deep into the armored maw of the machine's hull, designed to break planetary crusts and annihilate anything in its path with a single concentrated discharge. Dane exhaled. This isn't just a war machine hangar. This is an extinction protocol. KLMV's response crackled through the comms, almost approving. Correct. War doctrine. Absolute reclamation. Human sovereignty will be restored. A distant shockwave split the sky, a rippling explosion that turned the clouds amber and red, heralding the arrival of the Voidborn fleet. Dane could already see the distant black scars of their orbital warships, their serpentine hulls rippling as they phased through space, slipping through dimensions like shadows uncoiling from deep water. "They're not waiting for us to make the first move," Kryn muttered, her knuckles white against her console. "They're phasing straight into atmospheric combat," Jorek scoffed, rolling his shoulders. "Then let's stop standing around and make 'em regret it." Dane moved first, heading straight toward the Titan Walker activation terminal, its interface nothing but shifting filaments of liquid energy. He extended his gloved fingers and let the connection take hold. The reaction was instantaneous. The entire hangar rumbled as power surged through the war machines, their internal reactors igniting after centuries of dormancy. Hydraulic locks snapped apart, energy conduits glowed white-hot, and the air thickened with static discharge as the constructs came to life. The Titan walkers shuddered as their neural cores synchronized, their optical sensors blazing to full brightness. The predation-class hunter swarms detached from their racks, unfolding their razor-like appendages, their weapon systems cycling through rapid-fire diagnostics, priming themselves for war. The land dreadnought's fusion core pulsed, its main cannon slowly powering to full charge, the reactor sending waves of heat through the chamber, causing the very air to distort around it. KLMV's voice echoed across the deployment bay. "Voidborn assault fleet descending. Aerial combat parameters initialized." A new heads-up display materialized across Dane's visor, linking his neural interface directly to the Titan Walker systems. For the first time in centuries, the Titan Legion was awake. Dane stepped forward, locking his stance. "Then let's show them why they should have stayed dead." The Titan Walkers moved in sync with him, stepping forward with thunderous weight, their massive frames shaking the very earth beneath them. The hangar's external walls peeled apart, revealing the war-ravaged sky, where the Voidborn ships were descending like black daggers, their hull plating shifting like liquid shadows as they prepared to fire. But this time, humanity was waiting, and they were the storm. The sky ripped open. A Voidborn dreadnought descended through the clouds, its body a twisted cathedral of blackened alloy and writhing cables, shifting like something alive. Its prow was scarred from battles fought in the abyss of space, but it bore no wounds deep enough to slow its descent. This was not a fleet built to conquer. It was a reaping force, an executioner's blade coming to finish what it had started 1,000 years ago. Dane locked his Titan Walker's systems into full sync. The metallic frame around him responded instantly, servos adjusting, power cycling through its massive limbs. A heads-up display flickered across his visor, streaming battlefield data, enemy formations, and terrain readings in cascading lines of hard-coded information. His Titan Walker, now fully activated, was not a machine to be piloted. It was a war form that moved with his intent, an extension of himself. The first shots thundered from above. Voidborn orbital cannons discharged pulses of energy that screamed through the atmosphere, striking the rising war machines below with terrifying force. The dreadnought's flank split open, revealing serrated deployment bays, releasing a flood of huntercraft, sleek, insectoid fighters, their hulls composed of folding carapace plating, their weapon mounts adjusting dynamically in midair as they twisted through the storm-ridden sky. Dane's visor flared red with incoming hostiles. "Incoming swarm-class assault units," Kryn's voice cut through the comms. "They're not trying to breach, they're trying to gut our defenses before we even deploy fully." "Then let's make sure they fail." Dane stepped forward, and the Titan Walker moved with him, its reinforced footfalls crushing the steel-plated floor beneath it. The first Voidborn skirmisher broke through the storm, swooping low, its wings lined with energy-diffusing membranes that made its silhouette waver like a mirage. Its forward-mounted plasma lances flickered blue before discharging a crackling arc of destructive energy. Dane moved on instinct. The Titan Walker rotated on its reinforced actuators, angling its multi-barreled railgun into firing position. The targeting reticle locked, the magnetically charged coils heating in sequence, and then fire. The round tore through the enemy fighter mid-dive, its body rupturing into a violent spray of liquefied metal and burning plasma, the remains spiraling into the ruins below. Another hunter craft swooped in from his blind spot, angling for an attack vector, but before Dane could react, a predation-class hunter swarm launched from the hangar bays. The automated attack drones were relentless and synchronized, streaking through the battlefield in razor-sharp formations, their energy projectile arrays locking onto multiple Voidborn signatures at once. The air erupted in a kaleidoscope of light and metal. Explosions rippled through the clouds as more enemy ships fell, the sky now an inferno of twisting trails and scattered wreckage. "Enemy warforms making planetfall," Jorek barked over the comms. "They're not just fighting from orbit, they're bringing in ground troops." Dane adjusted his Titan Walker's stance, switching his HUD display to ground-level engagements. And then he saw them. The Voidborn siege forms. Not ships, not traditional infantry. These were engineered horrors. They fell from their deployment bays like iron meteors, their bodies twisting mid-air before impact, their multi-jointed limbs unfolding in segmented clicks. When they landed, they didn't just hit the ground, they sunk into it, their clawed appendages driving into the broken earth like roots spreading through flesh. Their armor was layered with biometallic plating, shifting in real time to absorb impact, their eye clusters gleaming with sickly blue radiance as they scanned their surroundings. Each one bristled with weapons, forward-mounted fusion cannons, spinal artillery arrays, unfolding armaments designed to tear through reinforced structures. "Here they come," Kryn muttered. The first Voidborn construct moved with sickening speed, lunging forward in a blur of metallic sinew, its spinal-mounted cannons adjusting trajectories mid-charge. Dane twisted his Titan Walker's stance, bringing its kinetic pulse disruptor online. A powerful shockwave detonated from the Titan's forearm, slamming into the enemy warform before it could reach full speed. The Voidborn construct shuddered, its limbs scraping against the ground, but it didn't collapse. It recalibrated, realigned, and adapted. "They're learning," Dane realized. "Then let's make sure they learn the hard way," Jorek cut in. Dane switched his Titan's weapon systems. The railgun retracted into the warform's spinal frame, replaced by an underslung particle cannon, its reactor coils glowing with deep violet energy. He lined up the shot and fired. The Voidborn construct didn't just explode, it came apart in sections, its armor liquefying, its internal systems rupturing from within as the energy discharge destabilized its core structure. The battlefield descended into chaos. The Titan Legion advanced in formation, their massive frames moving in unison, releasing hails of energy projectiles and magnetically accelerated artillery rounds into the enemy ranks. The land dreadnought finally emerged from its deployment bay, its triple-barreled fusion cannon locking onto the largest enemy warform on the field. The weapon charged, energy coalescing at its core, the heat output warping the air around it. Then it fired. A tunnel of devastation ripped through the battlefield, obliterating an entire column of Voidborn constructs, their metallic bodies reduced to slag, their energy cores rupturing in violent detonations. Kryn's voice rang out through the comms. Voidborn dreadnoughts are shifting tactics. The laser plasma display on Dane's HUD flickered with new warnings. Something bigger was coming. A Voidborn warform, unlike anything in the Dominion's archives. Jorek exhaled. I think we just pissed them off. Dane narrowed his eyes. Good. Dane Vorton's Titan Walker braced against the shockwave ripping through the battlefield, the force rolling over the war-torn earth like a tidal surge. The land dreadnought's fusion cannon had carved a path of devastation, leaving behind only twisted metal husks and vaporized wreckage. Yet the war was far from over. Across the battlefield, the Voidborn adapted. The fallen constructs didn't simply die. They reconfigured, their shattered husks liquefying and reassembling, forming something new, something worse. Shifting amalgamations, hunched and grotesque, their jagged forms pulsing with dark energy, stalked forward with a hunger that wasn't mechanical, but something deeper, more ancient. Dane's heads-up display flickered, tracking the erratic movement of the reconstructed warforms. These weren't just machines. They were evolving entities. Commander, Kryn's voice cut through the comms, urgency laced in every syllable. They're using the battlefield itself, salvaging their own wreckage, altering tactics in real time. They're not fighting for control anymore, Jorek growled. They're fighting to consume. A new signature flared across Dane's laser plasma display, larger than anything else in the fight. The Voidborn weren't just adapting, they were summoning something. Dane twisted the Titan Walker's stance, locking onto the monstrous construct descending from the fractured clouds. It wasn't like the others. Where the previous Voidborn constructs had been mechanized horrors, this was something organic, fused with metal, writhing with coils of biomechanical sinew. Its elongated limbs coiled and uncoiled, its chest cavity bristling with pulsating energy conduits that shifted like breathing lungs. Then it screamed, not through sound but through a deep, resonant pulse that tore through their neural interfaces, a signal that bypassed comms entirely. It wasn't just an enemy, it was a declaration. Dane's vision swam for half a second before he overrode the interference. "Status?" he snapped. Kryn's fingers blurred over her controls. "We just lost the Predation-class swarms. The enemy pulse fried their neural cores. Whatever that thing is, it can disrupt more than just our comms," Jorek cursed. "Then we stop it before it turns the whole battlefield into its playground." Dane moved. His Titan Walker surged forward, its servos hissing under the force of acceleration, the reinforced plating absorbing the shrapnel-laden winds swirling through the ruins. His targeting systems locked onto the towering monstrosity, and with a mental command, the particle disruptor array on his left arm spooled to full charge. The first volley hit dead center, the impact rupturing through the creature's biometallic plating, sending rippling distortions through its core structure. But it didn't fall. Instead, it absorbed the kinetic transfer, its body shifting, adapting, molding itself around the energy discharge. Then, with inhuman speed, it retaliated. One of its elongated arms lanced forward, its bladed appendage slicing through air like a guillotine. Dane threw his Titan Walker into a sidestep, the massive warform shifting on reinforced stabilizers, narrowly avoiding the strike. But the creature wasn't done. Its secondary limbs split apart, revealing a secondary layer of razor-edged tendrils, each one crackling with disruptive energy. A second strike came, faster than expected. The impact struck his Titan's right flank, sending a cascade of internal alerts flooding his visor. Armor integrity dropping, power rerouting. "Dane, your stabilizers are compromised." Crin's voice was tight with alarm. "Then I won't need them," he muttered. He pushed forward, forcing his Titan into close-quarters combat. The warform responded instantly, his reinforced arm actuators extended, converting his Titan's secondary plating into an adaptive blade module, a weapon designed not just to cut, but to disrupt energy cohesion on contact. With a single sweeping motion, the blade tore through the creature's midsection, its energy-dampening field preventing the Voidborn construct from reconstructing immediately. A howling resonant wave burst from the enemy's core, sending fractured data streams bleeding through Dane's interface. And in that moment he saw it. Not just the enemy, not just the battlefield. The truth. The Voidborn had never been conquerors. They had been something else, something born from failure. They had tried once to become something greater, to transcend the limits of flesh and steel. And in their failure they had become hunger. Dain staggered under the force of revelation, but he didn't let it consume him. He adjusted his stance, realigned his Titan's core processor, and sent a final override command to his warform's central reactor. Charge complete. The Titan Walker's particle disruptor pulsed to maximum output, its core system siphoning power from its entire energy matrix. He wouldn't just damage this thing, he would erase it. "Jorek, clear the impact zone!" "You got it, Commander!" Jorek fired a last covering shot, then veered his Titan out of the blast radius. Dane's hands tightened on his neural controls. He unleashed hell. The disruptor blast tore through the monstrous construct, its form unraveling in a cascade of burning light and liquid metal, its limbs splintering into useless fragments before collapsing into the crater below. And for the first time since the battle started, silence stretched across the battlefield. Crin's voice broke through the static. "Dane, tell me you're seeing this." He turned his Titan Walker toward the laser plasma display, still streaming battlefield analytics. And then his breath caught. The Voidborn weren't retreating. They were coalescing, merging. The battlefield wasn't just a battleground anymore, it was a forge. And the thing forming in the center of the ruined city wasn't a construct anymore. It was something new, something born from war itself. Jorek exhaled sharply. "Tell me we have a plan for this." Dain's grip tightened. "If we don't, we make one." Dain Vortan's Titan Walker adjusted its stance, the servos grinding under the stress of continuous battle as he watched the abomination before him take its first step. It was immense, towering over even the land dreadnoughts. Its body was a fusion of metallic sinew and shifting black alloy, its plating constantly adapting, twisting, flowing like molten steel cooling in real time. Multiple arms extended from its shifting torso, each lined with jagged growths of crystalline energy, radiating a pulse that distorted the space around it. The battlefield had bred a monster. And it wasn't just alive, it was thinking. Dane's heads-up display flooded with warning signals, combat analytics struggling to process the entity's structure, weapons recalibrating, tactics adjusting. The machine wasn't simply reacting, it was learning. Jorek's voice crackled over the comms. "That thing just killed its own to make itself stronger. What the hell are we fighting?" Crin's fingers danced over her console, attempting to push through the data storm flooding their feeds. "It's rewriting its molecular structure with every second. If we hit it with conventional weapons, it'll just assimilate the damage." Dane clenched his jaw, eyes locked on the shifting behemoth before them. "Then we don't fight it conventionally." The Voidborn abomination lunged forward, covering an impossible distance in an instant. Its limbs folded and unfolded in mid-motion, striking with a speed that betrayed its massive size. The ground beneath its impact splintered into a seismic rupture, the shockwave rolling outward. Dane threw his Titan Walker into an emergency evasive maneuver, servos straining as he barely avoided the gargantuan arm slamming into the space he'd occupied a second before. Chunks of reinforced alloy scattered like shattered bone, fragments embedding themselves into the battlefield. The land dreadnought retaliated, its triple-barreled fusion cannon discharging a payload of condensed solar energy, the light swallowing the battlefield in a brief but blinding inferno. The blast struck center mass. The Voidborn entity staggered, its form warping against the force, but it didn't collapse. It absorbed. The molten edges of its frame solidified, the scars of damage already reforming into something denser, stronger, deadlier. Jorek swore. If we keep hitting it, we're just feeding it. Kryn's voice cut through, sharp as a blade. Then we hit it with something it can't absorb. Dane's mind raced, sifting through the tactical framework of the battlefield. The Sentinel-class warforms had been ineffective, the aerial swarms rendered useless, and the land dreadnought's payload had only made it worse. They needed something more than firepower. They needed annihilation. Then he saw it. Not a weapon, not a machine, but a war doctrine written 1,000 years ago. The Titans had been built for planetary reclamation, not just to defend, but to erase and overwrite. Dane's Titan Walker shifted its weight, internal systems recalibrating as he overrode the standard combat protocols. He didn't need firepower. He needed a reset. Kryn, I'm accessing the deep core energy grid. Route it into the planetary stabilization field. A pause. Then, Dane, that's suicide. You overload that, and we're talking a seismic level collapse. The entire battlefield will become a kill zone. Exactly, he said, voice steady as iron. Jorek exhaled sharply. If this works, drinks are on you. The ground trembled beneath them as the Titan Walker linked into the deep core systems, synchronizing with the buried infrastructure that had remained dormant for centuries. This wasn't just a weapons platform, this was an execution system, an entire planet wired for war. The Voidborn abomination sensed the shift, its tendrils expanding, its mass contorting into a shape no mind could comprehend, and then it moved to strike again. Dain didn't wait. He triggered the sequence. The deep core reactors surged to life, the buried conduits that had once been veins of the earth now turning into conduits of obliteration. The ground itself detonated in controlled sequences, plates shifting, collapsing, swallowing sections of the battlefield in a spiral of destruction that was neither natural nor accidental. The planet was becoming the weapon. The Voidborn abomination recoiled, its body destabilizing, unable to latch onto a battlefield that was actively rejecting its existence. Dane pushed the final override command. A pulse surged across the planet, a detonation of electromagnetic interference and gravitational collapse concentrated into a single point of annihilation. The Voidborn entity twisted, screeched, writhed against the force, its own shifting matter fracturing, its body unable to stabilize. It wasn't just being destroyed, it was being erased. The final shockwave split the sky, and then silence. The battlefield was still. The Voidborn entity was gone. Dane slumped back in his seat, his Titan Walker locking into stasis mode, servos cooling from the exertion. Jorek's voice, breathless but alive, filled the comms. You ever pull a stunt like that again, and I'm punching you in the face? Kryn's laugh was shaky. If he does, I'm helping. Dane let out a breath, scanning the now empty space where the abomination had stood. The war wasn't over. Not yet. But this battle? This one was theirs. The battlefield lay in ruins. The last echoes of seismic detonations rolled through the air, leaving behind a shattered landscape where the monstrous Voidborn entity had stood. What remained was not just destruction, but an absence. An eerie silence where something colossal had once existed, as if the planet itself had forced it out of reality. Dane Vortan pushed forward, his Titan Walker systems recalibrating, energy reserves siphoning from auxiliary power cells. The warform was battered but still operational. The fight wasn't over, not yet. Kryn, Jorek, status? His voice remained even, though his muscles burned with exhaustion. Functional, Kryn responded, breathless. Systems running at 70%, weapon reserves depleted, but I can still fly this damn thing. Jorek's tone was sharp, alert. Titans walking, but I wouldn't trust it to run. Reactors overheating. We need to finish this before we're the ones melting. Dane's heads-up display shifted, data feeds adjusting as Calum V's voice flickered through the comms. Enemy forces retreating from the planetary engagement zone. tracking Voidborn fleet movements. Dane watched the laser plasma display render the shifting battlefield. Not just Earth, but the Voidborn's next move. They weren't just regrouping, they were converging. And at the center of it all lay the Void Throne, the heart of their dominion. "They're pulling back to their fortress," Kryn observed, scanning the feed. "That means one of two things. Either they're preparing for a last stand, or they're luring us into something worse," Jorek finished. Dane exhaled slowly. "Then we don't give them time to make it worse." He shifted his Titan into a march, leading the remaining warforms toward the planetary dock where their fleet remained. The battle for Earth had been about survival. The next fight wouldn't be defensive. It would be an invasion. Inside Halvoth Prime, the war table flickered with layered topographical data, mapping out the Voidborn's core stronghold. The Void Throne wasn't a single structure. It was an entire planetary citadel, a fortress world designed not just for occupation, but as a weaponized seat of power. Rael Istrin, now back in control of the fleet, studied the feed with a grim expression. "Direct assault would be a massacre. That stronghold has planetary shielding, orbital defenses, and enough anti-ship weaponry to turn our fleet into dust." Kryn leaned over the console, frowning at the energy signatures rippling around the Void Throne. "They're using a planetary lattice defense, not just shields, active countermeasures woven into the planetary crust itself. They'll neutralize anything larger than a fighter before it gets through." Dane studied the data, mind already working through possibilities. The Voidborn weren't just defending. They were anchoring themselves to their last stronghold, leveraging every technological horror they had left. "Then we don't fight them ship to ship," he said. "We disrupt their entire defensive grid from the inside." Rael's brow furrowed. "We don't have the firepower for a ground assault of that scale." "We don't need firepower," Dane countered. "We need access, and we're going to take it the same way they tried to take Earth, by using the battlefield itself." Jorek smirked. "Let me guess. You want to turn their own defenses against them." Dane nodded. "We launch an infiltration strike using the debris fields around their stronghold as cover. We get inside the lattice network, override their planetary systems, and force a cascade failure across their shield generators. Once their grid collapses, the fleet moves in. We bring the whole throne crashing down." Kryn's fingers tapped against the console, running calculations at a breakneck pace. "It's possible, if we can bypass their automated countermeasures before they register us as an invasive force. We'd have to sync our approach with their orbital traffic patterns, use their own entry lanes as blind spots." Rael hesitated. "That's a hell of a gamble. If you're off by even a fraction, they'll vaporize you before you touch the ground." Dane met his gaze, unwavering. "We don't have the luxury of a second option." A tense pause. Then Rael sighed, rubbing his temple. "You get in there, Vortan. You better finish the job." Dane's voice was steel. "I don't plan on leaving anything standing." The fleet moved in coordinated silence, skirting the outer debris fields left behind by centuries of Voidborn warfare. The plan relied on precision flying, low emission signatures, and split-second adjustments. Dane piloted his Titan Walker inside the hold of a modified drop pod, its frame reinforced for rapid deployment. Kryn and Jorek rode alongside, their warforms secured in magnetized clamps, awaiting the moment the breach began. Kalemvi's voice cut in. "Approach window confirmed. Calculating optimal deployment sequence." Dane's grip tightened around the controls as the Voidborn's orbital scanners flickered across the screen, sweeping over the debris field. One wrong move, and they'd be vaporized before even touching the surface. Then, launch protocol initiated. Drop sequence commencing. The clamps released. Dane's Titan hurtled through the void, plummeting through the defense lattice, twisting through the fractured maze of war wreckage. The air around them ignited, fragments of old warships colliding in burning streaks. Alarms blared across the Titan's interface. "Adjusting trajectory!" Kryn called out, her war form rolling into a controlled descent, stabilizers flaring. "Stay on course!" Dane ordered. Their window was seconds from closing. The Voidborn's anti-air defenses activated, turrets pivoting toward their descent vectors, energy charges building in their barrels. They had one shot before they were locked in the kill zone. Jorek's Titan Walker angled its cannons, firing a plasma dispersal charge into the atmosphere. The detonation rippled outward, creating a feedback loop in the targeting array, momentarily blinding the Voidborn's targeting systems. It was all the opening they needed. The Titan Walkers slammed into the surface, plating groaning under the impact, dust coiling in thick waves around them. Dane's interface recalibrated. They were inside, and the Void Throne was waiting. Dane Vortan's Titan Walker moved with measured steps, its massive frame casting shifting shadows against the fractured remains of the Void Throne's outer stronghold. The sky was a bleeding rift of fire and war, the Dominion's fleet hammering against the Voidborn defenses in a symphony of destruction, but none of it mattered. Not yet. Not until he finished what humanity started. "Status!" he barked into the comms, his voice edged with steel. Kryn's Titan Walker emerged from the wreckage beside him, her silhouette framed by the burning wreckage of an anti-air battery. "Jorek's pinned near the primary lattice core. They've activated a failsafe. If we don't shut it down now, this entire stronghold is going to collapse on top of us." Dane scanned the laser plasma display inside his cockpit, mapping the energy surges rippling through the Void Throne's infrastructure. The entire world was unraveling, collapsing into a controlled detonation, a final act of defiance. Jorek's voice cut through the static, breathless, but steady. "That's not the worst part. They're still here." Dane narrowed his eyes. "Who?" A pause. Then, in a voice cold enough to kill a dying sun, Jorek answered, "The ones who never left." And then, from the depths of the stronghold, they came. The Voidborn had never been just machines, nor entirely organic. They were something that had transcended both and fallen short of either, trapped in a hunger that could never be satisfied. And now, with their fortress crumbling, they emerged from the broken halls, their twisted forms a culmination of every failed evolution they had undergone. No towering war machines this time. No massive constructs meant to blot out the sky. These were the architects, the ones who had guided the war from the shadows, creatures of pure intelligence and malice wrapped in bodies that were half memory, half nightmare. They moved without motion. Their bodies shifted and flickered, their tendrils extending like skeletal fingers, their empty faces stretching into hollow mockeries of the living. Dane steeled himself against the unnatural presence pressing into his mind. It was not speech. It was recognition, a knowing, a revelation. The Voidborn had feared this day, feared it so much that they had done the impossible to prevent it, tried to wipe out an entire species, believing that without humanity they would be free. And yet, here he stood. "You were right to be afraid," Dane muttered, adjusting his Titan stance. "But not for the reasons you think." The Voidborn didn't speak in words. They spoke in desperation, in the shattering of dimensions, in the way they coiled like dying stars trying to consume themselves. "You should not be here," the whisper scraped against his consciousness. "You are ruin. You are error. You are the failure of flesh-given form." Dane gave them the only answer they deserved. His Titan Walker raised its right arm, its energy cannon cycling to full charge, the core burning white-hot as power coalesced. "You should have made sure we stayed dead," he fired. The blast tore through the first entity, its body splintering apart not into blood or metal, but into something worse, fragments of possibility collapsing into non-existence. The others reeled, their bodies flickering, but they didn't retreat. They surged forward, surrounding the Titan Walkers in a wave of sheer, impossible presence. Kryn's voice was tight, controlled. "We can't fight this the way we fought the others." "No," Dane agreed, "but we're not here to fight. We're here to erase them." Jorek's Titan limped into view, armor cracked, weapons overheating, but he was still standing. "Then we finish what they started," he said, his voice more alive than it had ever been. Kalemba's voice surged through the comms. "Planetary core instability detected. Cascade failure imminent. Recommend immediate extraction." Dane's fingers tightened on the controls. Extraction wasn't the plan. Victory was. "Override planetary systems," he ordered. "Divert all remaining power into the deep core resonance grid. We're turning their throne into a tomb." The ground shook violently, not from battle but from something far deeper, an unraveling, a final scream of a dying world that had long overstayed its welcome. The Voidborn felt it too. Their hunger turned to fear. Their certainty cracked. "You do not understand," they hissed, their forms fracturing at the edges. "You will undo everything." Dane allowed himself the smallest smile. That's the idea. He sent the final command. The planet groaned as the deep core grid activated, a wave of energy ripping through every structure, every corridor, every fragment of technology that had once belonged to the Voidborn, and for the first time in their existence, they felt what it was like to be devoured. The Void Throne collapsed in on itself, its own energy ripping through the fabric of its reality, swallowing its creators in a vortex of destruction. The sky fractured, and the last of the Voidborn were gone. Dane's Titan Walker staggered into the evac zone, its armor blackened, systems barely holding together. He barely registered the fleet's extraction beacon, barely noticed the hands that pulled him from the cockpit. The war was over. He stood at the viewport of Halvoth Prime, watching as the once great stronghold of the Voidborn became nothing more than a dying ember in the void. For a moment, he simply stared. Kryn stood beside him, arms crossed, gaze distant. I wonder if they ever really understood. Jorek leaned against the frame, exhausted but grinning. They understood one thing. Dain tilted his head slightly. "What's that?" Jorek exhaled, eyes reflecting the fading remnants of the enemy that had tried to wipe them out. "That humanity never stays buried." The words settled between them, weightier than any war machine, heavier than any weapon. They had been hunted, erased, cast into history's grave, but they had risen. And now, the galaxy knew it.